They thought Earth was defenseless, a fatal mistake. Panic erupted worldwide as the massive Vorkarian fleet materialized in orbit, the warlike empire's ships blotting out the sun. Urgent orders summoned Commander Scott Webb deep into the Rocky Mountains to Orbital Defense Command. There, buried under miles of rock, he discovered the truth. For decades, Earth had been preparing. Code-named Aegis, a network of heavily armed orbital platforms, now stood ready, humanity's secret contingency against another alien invasion. Webb watched the crisis unfold on the command center's screens. A Vorkarian shuttle breached the blockade, landing in New York. Prince Mizar of the Vorkarian royal family emerged to a stunned United Nations assembly. In a globally broadcast speech, he revealed a shocking revelation. The once mighty conquerors were now desperate refugees, their empire annihilated by the infinitum swarm, a machine intelligence bent on eradicating all biological life. With the relentless swarm already nearing the solar system, Mizar pleaded for asylum in an alliance. Suspicion and hostility hung heavy in the air as Mizar met with Earth's leaders in the imposing General Graves, head of Earth's Space Forces. Graves unveiled the Aegis platforms, a stunning display of humanity's hidden military might. The reason the Vorkarians' invasion centuries ago had failed. An uneasy partnership began to form. Both sides needed the other to survive, yet old enmities still simmered. Promoted to lead the Aegis battle group, Webb found himself at the eye of the coming storm, acting as liaison between human and Vorkarian forces as they raced to integrate technology and battle plans. But as preparations for the swarm intensified, troubling evidence emerged, hinting this may not be the first time the two species had joined against this enemy. The clock was ticking. If the fragile alliance fractured, annihilation was certain. Humanity's secret weapons were now out in the open. The battle for Earth was about to begin. As Scott walked into the command center, the tension was palpable. Standing across from him was Admiral Zara, her dark eyes sizing him up with a mix of wariness and grudging respect. She cut an imposing figure in her sleek black Vorkarian battle armor, a stark contrast to the utilitarian uniforms of the human officers. "Commander Webb," Zara said, her voice clipped and formal, "I am told you will be my counterpart in this alliance." Scott met her gaze unflinchingly. "Admiral Zara, I look forward to working with you to defeat our common enemy." Zara's lip curled slightly. "We shall see." The two commanders turned to the holographic display dominating the center of the room. It showed a real-time map of the solar system, with the positions of human and Vorkarian ships marked in blue and green, respectively. At the edge of the display, angry red dots indicated the approaching swarm scouts. Over the next days, Scott and Zara worked tirelessly to integrate their forces and technology. Vorkarian engineers swarmed over the Aegis platforms, retrofitting them with advanced shield generators and powerful new weapons. In turn, human AI experts worked to upgrade the Vorkarian ships' autonomic systems, improving their coordination and responsiveness in battle. When the first swarm scouts reached Saturn's rings, the alliance was ready. Scott and Zara led a joint strike force, human and Vorkarian ships flying in tight formation as they engaged the enemy. The icy rings lit up with the flash of explosions as the swarm drones were torn apart by the combined firepower of the alliance. But even as they celebrated their first victory, the true scale of the threat became clear. The swarm's numbers seemed endless, their attacks relentless. For every drone destroyed, a dozen more took its place, pressing the attack with single-minded grit. On Earth, tensions were rising. News of the Vorkarian refugees sparked protests and unrest. The scars of the past invasion still fresh in many minds. Prince Mizar worked tirelessly with Earth's leaders to maintain the fragile peace, even as he struggled with the weight of his own people's desperate plight. Then came the shocking revelation. In a public address, Mizar shared ancient records that told of a long-forgotten alliance between humans and Vorkarians, forged in the face of an even more ancient threat. The swarm, it seemed, was not a new enemy, but one that had been fought and defeated before, at a terrible cost. The implications were staggering. Somewhere in the deep past, something had happened to shatter the old alliance and wipe out all memory of it, and now History seemed to be repeating itself, with the swarm bearing down on them once again. As Scott and Zara struggled to come to terms with this new knowledge, the swarm launched a massive offensive. Breaching the outer defenses, the machine swarms poured into the inner solar system, targeting Mars and the vital shipyards and defense installations in its orbit. The battle was brutal. Human and Vorkarian ships fought side by side, their shields flaring under the onslaught of the swarm's disintegrator beams. Scott found himself in the thick of the fighting, his ship darting and weaving through the enemy formations, guns blazing. In a high-stakes endeavor, he led a boarding party onto a swarm command ship, hoping to find some weakness they could exploit. Inside the alien vessel, they found a central nexus pulsing with malevolent energy. But before they could extract any data, swarm drones ambushed them, forcing a fighting retreat back to their own ship. The command ship self-destructed moments after they escaped, but not before they retrieved a portion of its databanks. As Earth's analysts pored over the information, a chilling picture emerged. The swarm was not simply a machine intelligence, but a vast neural network that assimilated the minds and knowledge of every organic being it consumed. The Vorkarians realized with growing horror that their fallen empire and countless other civilizations now lived on inside the swarm, their knowledge and essence fueling its relentless advance. Faced with this new understanding, Scott and Zara knew that conventional tactics would not be enough. As Mars burned and the swarm pressed ever closer to Earth, they began to formulate a desperate plan, one that would force them to confront not only the enemy without, but the ghosts of their own past. The secrets buried by the old alliance whispered of a terrible weapon, one that had been used to defeat the swarm before. But to uncover its location and learn how to wield it, Scott and Zara would have to delve into the forbidden history that both their peoples had long suppressed. As they prepared for what might be their final battle, the weight of the past hung heavy on them. The fate of Earth, the Vorkarians, and the entire galaxy would rest on the choices they made in the coming days. The alliance had been reforged in the flames of war, but whether it would hold fast against the oncoming storm remained to be seen. The Titan operation came together with breakneck speed. Within days of conceiving the plan, Scott Webb found himself strapped into a stealth dropship, leading a strike team towards the swarm's processing hub on Saturn's largest moon. Beside him sat Prince Azric, Zara's younger brother. The Vorkarian's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and trepidation as he triple-checked his xenotech gear. "Remember," Scott said, his voice low, "we're in and out, no heroics." Azric nodded, but Scott caught the hint of a smile. The young prince was eager to prove himself. The dropship shuddered as it entered Titan's thick atmosphere. Through the viewports, Scott saw the hub looming ahead, a vast biomechanical structure that pulsed with sickly light. 30 seconds to touchdown," the pilot's voice crackled over the comm. "Brace for—" A sudden impact rocked the ship. Alarms blared. "Swarm drones!" the pilot shouted. "They've spotted us!" Scott's mind raced. Their element of surprise was gone. "Change of plans. We're going in hot." The dropship's bay doors burst open. Scott and his team leapt out, propulsion packs flaring as they dodged incoming fire. They hit the ground running, weapons blazing at the swarm of drones converging on their position. "Azric, with me!" Scott barked. "Marines, cover our six!" They fought their way through the hub's outer defenses, each chamber more nightmarish than the last. Self-replicating defenses sprouted from the walls, forcing them to keep moving or be overwhelmed. Finally, they reached the central core. Azric immediately set to work, fingers flying over his hollow interface as he hacked into the swarm's systems. "By the stars," Azric whispered, his face pale. "Commander Webb, you need to see this." Scott glanced at the prince's screen and felt his blood run cold. The data streaming past told a horrifying story. The swarm wasn't just a machine intelligence, it was powered by the assimilated minds of entire civilizations. "There's more," Azric said, his voice shaking. "The swarm, it's our creation, human and Vorkarian." Before Scott could process this revelation, alarms blared throughout the hub. The AI core had detected them. "How much longer?" Scott shouted over the din. 2 minutes, Azaric replied, working furiously. The chamber doors burst open. A tide of lethal sentinel drones poured in. "Marines, hold the line," Scott ordered, opening fire. The next 2 minutes were chaos. Scott and his team fought with desperate intensity, buying time for Azaric to complete the download. The air filled with plasma fire and the screeching of metal. "Done!" Azaric yelled triumphantly. "Fall back," Scott commanded. They retreated, fighting every step of the way. The hub was collapsing around them, the self-destruct sequence triggered by their intrusion. They were almost to the extraction point when Scott heard Azaric cry out in pain. He turned to see the young prince stumble, a smoking wound in his side. Scott didn't hesitate. He scooped up Azaric and sprinted for the waiting dropship, plasma bolts sizzling past his head. They made it, but at a terrible cost. As the dropship rocketed away from the disintegrating hub, Scott looked at the empty seats around him. Half his team was gone. The return to Earth was somber. In the command center, the gravity of their discoveries settled over everyone like a shroud. The swarm was evolving faster than they could adapt. Conventional tactics would soon be useless. But there was a glimmer of hope. Buried in the stolen data was evidence of a vulnerability, a backdoor in the swarm's code, a remnant of its origins. Scott met Zara's eyes across the holotable. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They both knew what had to be done. "We need to build an EMP weapon," Scott said, breaking the silence. "One powerful enough to cripple their entire network." Zara nodded grimly. "And we'll need a way to deliver it, a suicide run." "That buys us time," Scott continued. "But to truly win, we need to exploit that back door." As if on cue, the doors slid open. Azaric limped in, still pale but determined. "I can do it," he said. "I can crack their code." The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. As plans were drawn and orders given, Scott felt the weight of what was to come settle on his shoulders. The swarm's main force was approaching. Soon, Earth's skies would darken with enemy ships. This was it, their last stand. Everything hinged on what they did next. Scott looked around at the faces of his unlikely allies. Human and Vorkarian united against extinction. Whatever happened, they would face it together. He took a deep breath and turned to the vast holographic display of Earth's defenses. "Let's get to work." The massive swarm assault on Earth began without warning. The sky blazed with the fiery trails of countless drone ships breaching the atmosphere. From the Aegis command platform, Commander Scott Webb and Admiral Zara coordinated a frantic defense. "Aegis batteries, concentrate fire on Sector 7, Scott barked, his eyes darting across the holographic display. "We can't let them establish a foothold." Zara's fingers flew over her console, redirecting squadrons of fighters. "Human forces, form up on the Vorkarian cruisers. Use their shields for cover." Wave after wave of swarm drones crashed against Earth's orbital defenses. The combined human and Vorkarian fleet fought with desperate intensity, but for every drone destroyed, 2 more took its place. In a nearby chamber, Prince Azaric hunched over banks of computers, his face bathed in the glow of scrolling data. He muttered to himself as he worked, decoding the remnants of the swarm's neural network backdoor. A lull in the fighting allowed a damaged swarm scout ship to be captured. Scott and Zara rushed to the hangar as it was brought aboard. Engineering teams cut their way inside, revealing the drone crew. Scott's stomach turned at the sight. The drones were clearly once organic beings, now more machine than flesh. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light as they stared blankly ahead. Zara gasped, her usual composure cracking. "No, it can't be." She approached one of the drones, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch its face. "Nira? Sister?" Scott watched in stunned silence as Zara's eyes filled with tears. Her long-lost sister, thought dead for years, was trapped inside the drone's body. Zara's expression hardened, a new fire in her eyes. "We have to free them. All of them." The revelation spurred them to action. In the command center, they formulated a daring plan. Prince Mizar volunteered to act as bait, luring a swarm command nexus into range. "It's too risky," Scott argued. Mizar shook his head. We have no choice. This may be our only chance. The plan was set in motion. Mizar's ship broadcast a signal that caught the swarm's attention. As the massive command nexus approached, Scott led a strike team in a stealth shuttle, slipping past its defenses. They fought their way through twisting corridors of biomechanical horror. At the nexus core, they planted Azric's data virus. Alarms blared as the system detected the intrusion. "It's working," Scott shouted over the comm. "Fall back to the shuttle." But as they retreated, disaster struck. The nexus, sensing the threat, prepared to jump away. Mizar was still aboard, cut off from escape. "Go!" Mizar's voice crackled over the comm. "Complete the mission." Scott's team made it back to their shuttle just as the nexus vanished in a flash of light, taking Mizar with it. The local swarm forces, cut off from central control, fell into disarray. On Earth, the situation grew tense. Protests erupted in major cities as some factions railed against the Vorkarian refugees. General Graves, seeing the bigger picture, defied orders to forcibly relocate them. Instead, he worked with Prince Azric to implement increased security measures and integration programs. Their efforts helped calm the unrest, at least temporarily. In the Aegis Command Center, Scott pored over battle data. An idea began to form, a daring plan that might turn the tide. He turned to Admiral Zara. "We can use the captured swarm scout as bait, lure their main fleet into a trap where we can hit them with everything we've got." Zara's eyes narrowed as she considered the plan. After a long moment, she nodded. "The stakes are too high to play it safe. Let's do it." As they began preparations for the final confrontation, Scott looked out at the scarred face of Earth below. Everything hinged on what came next. The fate of 2 civilizations and countless assimilated souls hung in the balance. The command center erupted into frenzied activity as Scott and Zara set their audacious plan into motion. Admiral Zara strode purposefully toward the hangar bay, her eyes gleaming with commitment. "I'll lead the decoy fleet," she announced, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "We'll make them believe we're evacuating Azric and other VIPs." Scott nodded, his fists tight. "I'll coordinate the defense from here. Be careful out there." As Zara's fleet launched, Scott turned his attention to the massive holographic display. He watched as the blips representing the Allied ships moved into position, tension coiling in his gut. Hours passed in agonizing anticipation. Then suddenly the swarm signal flared to life on the sensors. "They've taken the bait," Scott announced, his voice cutting through the hushed silence of the command center. "All units, prepare to engage on my mark." The swarm armada surged forward, a vast cloud of biomechanical horror intent on devouring Zara's fleet. At the last possible moment, Scott gave the order. "Now, reverse course." On the display, Zara's ships abruptly changed direction, narrowly evading the swarm's initial assault. In the same instant, the hidden planetary defense platforms roared to life. The space around Earth lit up with a dazzling array of weapons fire. Rail cannons spat hypervelocity slugs that tore through swarm ships smoothly. Missiles streaked across the void, detonating in brilliant flashes that consumed entire squadrons of drones. The experimental Dreadis beam weapons carved swaths of destruction through the swarm's formations. "Direct hit on swarm command ship," one of the tactical officers shouted. "We've crippled their primary communications array." Scott allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction before refocusing on the battle. "Keep up the pressure. Don't let them regroup." In a nearby chamber, Prince Azric worked feverishly at his console. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he raced to complete the neural network virus. "It's ready," he called out suddenly. "Uploading now!" A tense silence fell over the command center as they waited to see the results. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing seemed to change. Then chaos erupted across the battlefield. Swarm ships began to veer off course, colliding with each other or spinning aimlessly in space. Drones attached to Earth's surface went limp, their eerie glow fading. "It's working," Scott exclaimed. "The virus is—" His words were cut short as alarms blared throughout the command center. On the display, the swarm forces were rapidly reorganizing, purging the corrupted units and adapting their strategies. "Damn it," Scott muttered. "They're evolving faster than we anticipated." Just then, General Graves burst into the room, his face flushed with excitement. "Commander Webb, we've located Prince Mizar. He's aboard the Swarm Command Nexus." Scott's mind raced, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. He locked eyes with Zara, who had just returned from the decoy mission. A silent understanding passed between them. "We're going in," Scott declared. "Prepare a strike team immediately." Minutes later, Scott and Zara led a group of elite soldiers toward the heart of the Swarm Armada. Their ship weaved through the chaos of battle, dodging debris and weapons fire. As they approached the massive command nexus, Scott couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Something felt wrong, but there was no time for hesitation. "Breach charges set," one of the Marines reported. "Ready on your command, sir." Scott took a deep breath. "Do it." The charges detonated, blowing a hole in the Nexus's hull. Scott and his team surged forward, weapons at the ready. They fought their way through twisting corridors filled with nightmarish biomechanical growths, facing wave after wave of upgraded Sentinel drones. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The doors hissed open, revealing a sight that made Scott's blood run cold. There stood Mizar, but he was no longer the Vorkarian prince they had known. His body was a twisted fusion of flesh and machine, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. When he spoke, his voice echoed with the collective consciousness of the swarm. "You should not have come here," Mizar intoned, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Before Scott could respond, Mizar raised his hand. A psionic shockwave erupted from him, slamming into the strike team with devastating force. Scott was thrown against the wall, his vision blurring as he struggled to stay conscious. When the dust settled, only he and Zara remained standing. The rest of the team lay motionless on the floor. Scott met Zara's gaze, seeing his own grim realization mirrored in her eyes. There would be no capturing Mizar, no unlocking the secrets of the swarm. Not like this. His hand inched toward the detonator on his belt. One last, risky move. "Zara," he said softly, "we need to end this, now." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Do it." Scott's finger hovered over the button. In that moment, Mizar's face cleared, a flicker of his old self shining through the swarm's control. "Please," he whispered, his voice strained, "end it." Scott pressed the detonator. A blinding flash engulfed the chamber, followed by a deafening roar. As the explosion tore through the Swarm Command Nexus, Scott's world went dark. He awoke to the sterile white of a medical bay, the steady beep of monitors filling his ears. Admiral Zara stood at his bedside, her face a mask of exhaustion and relief. "Welcome back, Commander," she said, her voice hoarse. "We thought we'd lost you." Scott tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that lanced through his body. "Mizar? The swarm?" Zara's expression tightened. "The immediate threat has been neutralized, but at a great cost. We need to talk strategy." Days later, Scott found himself in a war council with Zara, General Graves, and the Zorgax royal strategists. Holographic displays flickered with battle data and star charts as they assessed their tenuous victory. "The swarm is regrouping in the Kuiper Belt," Graves reported, his weathered face grim. "Intel suggests they're preparing for an all-out assault to retake Earth." Zara leaned forward, her eyes intense. "We can't let that happen. I propose a preemptive strike." She outlined Operation Ragnarok, a daring plan to target the swarm's neural backup repository near Hamia. As the details of the mission took shape, Scott felt a familiar tension coiling in his gut. The risks were enormous, but they had no choice. "We'll need our best for this," he said, scanning the faces around him. Human and Zorgax working as one. The preparations for Ragnarok consumed the following weeks. Scott watched as elite human and Zorgax soldiers trained together, overcoming centuries of mistrust to forge a unified fighting force. A commotion near the hangar bay drew his attention. He arrived to find Master Sergeant Emerson, his grizzled second-in-command, locked in a heated argument with a Zorgax female. "Stand down, Sergeant," Scott ordered, stepping between them. He turned to the Zorgax, surprised to recognize her features. You must be Princess Serena. Cyrena nodded, her eyes never leaving Emerson. Your subordinate questions my presence on this mission. With all due respect, sir, Emerson growled, how do we know we can trust her? She was one of them. I was, Serena said, her voice cold. And now I'm your best chance at understanding their neural architecture. Scott held up his hands. Enough. We need every advantage we can get. Serena stays. As he walked away, leaving Emerson and Serena to sort out their differences, alarms blared throughout the base. Scott sprinted toward the command center, his heart racing. Inside, chaos reigned. Zara was shouting orders as security teams mobilized. Assassins, she explained tersely as Scott approached. Zorgak's purist. They're after you, me, and Cyrena. The base shook with the sound of explosions. Scott grabbed a weapon and headed for the door. Let's move. We need to secure Cyrena. They fought their way through smoke-filled corridors, the sounds of combat echoing around them. As they neared the hangar, a group of armed Zorgaks rounded the corner. Scott raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a blur of motion knocked him aside. Cyrena vaulted over him, her body a whirlwind of lethal precision as she engaged the assassins. Beside her, Emerson appeared, his rifle blazing. Together, they made short work of the attackers. As the last Zorgak's purist fell, Cyrena and Emerson shared a look of grudging respect. Scott realized that this unlikely pair might be the key to bridging the gap between their species. With the immediate threat neutralized, Scott and Zara convened an emergency meeting. We can't afford any more delays, Zara said, her voice tight with urgency. We launch Ragnarok now. Scott nodded, feeling the weight of countless lives on his shoulders. He turned to address the assembled strike team. This mission will determine the fate of both our peoples, he said, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. We go in hard, we go in fast, and we don't stop until that neural repository is dust. As the combined fleet prepared for the micro-jump to Haumea, Scott found himself on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the stars. Beside him, Zara stood in silence, both of them acutely aware of the stakes. The ship's AI began the countdown. Scott took a deep breath, steadying himself for what was to come. Jump in 3, 2, 1. The universe blurred, and Operation Ragnarok began. The universe blurred, and Operation Ragnarok launched into action. As reality snapped back into focus, chaos erupted on the bridge of the flagship. Multiple hull breaches, an officer shouted. We're venting atmosphere. Scott gripped the command console, his fist clenched. Status report! Zara's voice cut through the din. Swarm defenses are stronger than anticipated. We've lost a third of our fleet already. On the main view screen, explosions bloomed silently in the void. Human and Zorgak ships alike crumbled under the relentless assault of the swarm. Push forward, Scott ordered. We can't turn back now. The bridge shook violently as another impact rocked the ship. Warning klaxons blared, adding to the cacophony. Sir, Emerson's gruff voice crackled over the comm. We've breached their outer perimeter. Strike team is ready for deployment. Scott nodded grimly. Understood. Zara, you have the bridge. I'm joining the ground assault. Minutes later, Scott found himself aboard a dropship hurtling toward the surface of Haumea. Beside him, Serena checked her gear, her face a mask of purpose. The dropship bucked and weaved, dodging waves of interceptor fire. Scott's stomach lurched as they entered the atmosphere, friction scorching the hull. With a bone-jarring impact, they touched down. The hatch blew open, and Scott led the charge into the sterile corridors of the swarm's neural repository. Biomechanical horrors swarmed toward them. Scott's weapon spat superheated plasma, carving through the nightmarish constructs. Emerson covered their flank, his rifle chattering ceaselessly. They fought their way deeper into the facility, Serena guiding them with her intimate knowledge of swarm architecture. Finally, they reached the central core. There, Serena pointed to a pulsing mass of neural tissue and circuitry. That's the primary backup node. Destroy it, and we cripple their ability to regenerate. Scott raised his weapon, but Serena's hand on his arm stopped him. Wait, she said, her eyes gleaming with sudden insight. I can do more than destroy it. I can corrupt their entire neural network. Before anyone could object, Cyrena sprinted toward the core. She plunged her hands into the writhing mass, her body convulsing as she interfaced directly with the swarm's collective consciousness. "Cyrena, no!" Scott shouted, but it was too late. A blinding flash of energy erupted from the core, engulfing Cyrena and spreading outward in a rapidly expanding shockwave. "Fall back!" Emerson roared, dragging Scott toward the exit. They ran, the facility collapsing around them. As they reached the dropship, Scott looked back to see the entire structure imploding, consumed by a vortex of crackling energy. The dropship barely cleared the atmosphere before Haumea itself began to break apart. Scott watched in awe and horror as the planetoid shattered, taking with it the heart of the swarm's neural network. Aboard the flagship, Scott and Emerson stumbled onto the bridge. Zara's eyes widened at their battered appearance. "Report," she demanded. Scott opened his mouth to speak, but alarms cut him off. On the interface, a massive swarm battle group warped into the system. "We've stirred up the hornet's nest," Emerson growled. Zara's expression hardened. "All ships, prepare for immediate jump. We're getting out of here." As the remnants of their fleet engaged emergency drives, Scott felt a hollow victory settling in his gut. They had struck a devastating blow, but at what cost? The stars blurred once more as they fled, leaving behind the shattered remains of Haumea and the sacrifice of Princess Cyrena. Scott knew with grim certainty that their war with the swarm was nowhere near the end. The swarm battle group loomed behind them, a dark mass blotting out the stars. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared as emergency lights bathed the bridge in an eerie red glow. "Report!" Zara barked, gripping her command chair. "Antimatter containment failure in the slipstream drive," an officer shouted over the cacophony. "We're being pulled into a quantum vortex." Scott's stomach dropped as reality warped around them. The stars stretched into impossible lines, then vanished entirely. For an eternal moment, there was nothing but a void of absolute darkness. Then, with a thunderous crack, they emerged into normal space. The bridge fell silent as everyone took in their new surroundings. "Where are we?" Scott asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zara studied the readouts, her brow furrowed. "Unknown, but look." She pointed to the main view screen. Scott's jaw dropped as he saw what had captured her attention. An enormous ring world stretched across the void, its curved surface glinting in the light of an unfamiliar star. "Impossible," Emerson breathed. "Is that—" "Enki's crucible," Zara finished, her eyes wide with awe. "A myth come to life." As they marveled at the ancient megastructure, the ship's systems began to stabilize. Scott ran a quick diagnostic, his heart sinking as he processed the results. "The slipstream drive is fried," he reported, "and the rest of our fleet is still days away." Zara's expression hardened with persistence. "Then we make the most of our head start. Prep a strike team. We're going in." Hours later, Scott found himself piloting a stealth shuttle toward the ringworld's surface. Beside him, Zara checked her gear one last time. Emerson and a hand-picked squad of human and Zorgax commandos filled the passenger compartment. As they penetrated the ringworld's atmosphere, Scott's breath caught in his throat. The surface was a patchwork of abandoned cities, their towering spires reaching toward the sky in defiance of time itself. They set down in a vast plaza, the shuttle's engines kicking up swirls of centuries-old dust. Scott led the team out, weapons at the ready. "Fan out," he ordered. "Keep your eyes peeled for any sign of swarm activity." They moved through the empty streets, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of a civilization that had vanished eons ago. Emerson stopped suddenly, his rifle trained on a flickering hologram. "Sir, you need to see this." The team gathered around as the hologram sputtered to life. It showed humans and Zorgax working side by side, their expressions filled with hope and purpose. "It can't be," Zara whispered. "Our peoples were allies?" Before anyone could respond, a distant rumble shook the ground. Scott's combat instincts kicked in. "Move!" he shouted. "We've got company!" They sprinted through the abandoned city as swarms of biomechanical drones poured from hidden recesses. Plasma bolts sizzled past Scott's head as he returned fire, his weapon cutting down waves of the nightmarish constructs. Emerson took point, leading them toward a massive structure that dominated the skyline. "That's got to be it," he yelled over the din of battle. "The hybridization facility." They fought their way inside, sealing the doors behind them. As the sounds of combat faded, they found themselves in a cavernous chamber filled with arcane machinery. At its center stood a being that defied description, a twisted amalgamation of human, Zorgax, and machine. When it spoke, its voice resonated with madness and triumph. "Welcome, children," it crooned. "You've come home at last." Scott raised his weapon, but the hybrid entity merely laughed. It gestured to the surrounding equipment, pride evident in its grotesque features. "Behold the future," it declared, "the perfection of our work. Soon all life will be one. No more conflict, no more division. Only unity in glorious singularity." Horror dawned on Scott as he realized the full implications of what they faced. He turned to Zara, seeing his own stubborn persistence mirrored in her eyes. "We have to end this," he said. "Now." Zara nodded, her gaze fixed on a pulsing quantum matrix at the room's heart. "If we overload it, we can purge everything. But Scott—" She didn't need to finish. The cost was clear. Scott made his decision in an instant. "Do it. Emerson and I will keep it busy." As Zara and the rest of the team moved to sabotage the Matrix, Scott and Emerson engaged the hybrid monstrosity. They fought with desperate fury, buying precious seconds with their lives. The air crackled with building energy as the Matrix began to overload. Scott felt reality itself starting to fray around him. "Go!" he shouted to Zara. "Get out while you still can!" The last thing Scott saw was Zara's anguished face as she was dragged away by the retreating team. Then the world exploded in a blinding flash of light. Scott found himself floating in an ocean of nothingness. Beside him, Emerson's essence pulsed with confusion and fear. How long they drifted in that formless void, Scott couldn't say. But gradually he became aware of something, a presence, vast and ancient, observing them with detached curiosity. Before Scott could process what was happening, he felt himself being pulled back. Sensation returned in a rush, the cold deck of a ship beneath him, the acrid smell of ozone, the distant rumble of engines. He opened his eyes to find himself on the bridge of Zara's flagship. Beside him, Emerson groaned and sat up, looking as disoriented as Scott felt. Zara stared at them in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. "How?" she began, but words failed her. Scott looked down at his hands, marveling at the absence of scars and the vitality he felt coursing through his body. Whatever had happened in that quantum maelstrom had changed them profoundly. As the crew erupted in cheers around them, Scott met Zara's eyes. He saw in them a spark of hope that had been absent for far too long. "We've got work to do," he said simply. Zara nodded, her expression hardening with renewed purpose. "Indeed we do. The swarm may be wounded, but they're far from finished. And now we have the key to ending this war once and for all." As the fleet prepared for their final offensive, Scott couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's destiny among the stars was far greater and stranger than they had ever imagined. The revelation of humanity's intertwined destiny with the Zorgax ignited a fire within the Allied forces. Admiral Webb wasted no time mobilizing their newfound strength against the wounded swarm. "We strike while they're reeling," Webb announced, his eyes blazing with fierce intensity. "Zara, initiate Operation Shattered Sky." Zara nodded, her fingers flying across the tactical interface. Commencing data burst to all Allied vessels. Strike teams are go in 3, 2, 1. Across the star system, cloaked insertion ships materialized from slipspace. Emerson led the charge, his Marine squad breaching the hull of a massive swarm supply depot. Plasma cutters hissed as they carved through biomechanical defenses. "Push forward!" Emerson barked, his rifle spitting superheated death at the writhing swarm constructs. "Secure that quantum core!" Beside him, a towering Zorgax warrior named Fenric cleaved through the opposition with a crackling energy blade. "Your human tenacity is admirable," Fenric rumbled, azure blood splattered across his scaled hide. As the strike team's decimated swarm outposts, Admiral Zara orchestrated a brilliant web of deception. She transmitted falsified fleet movements, sacrificing entire squadrons to sell the lie. "Valron, take the 43rd Battle Group and engage the swarm's left flank," Zara ordered, her voice steady despite the cost in Zorgak's lives. Her brother's face twisted with barely concealed contempt. "As you wish, sister, but remember, our people's blood is on your hands." The seeds of discord Valron planted took root quickly. Within days, pockets of the Zorgak's fleet erupted into open rebellion. Webb grimaced as reports flooded in. "Constantine, what's our status on the Singularity payload?" The scientist's hologram flickered to life, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights of work. "Final calibrations complete, Admiral, but without a clear shot at their nexus." "Leave that to me," Webb said, his heart set strong. "Prep my command carrier. We're going in." The bridge of Webb's heavily modified vessel thrummed with nervous energy as they plunged into the Ort cloud. Swarm defenses swarmed around them, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror. "Evasive pattern Delta," Webb shouted as tentacles of living metal lashed out. "Constantine, status on the fracture?" "Sensors are going haywire," Constantine replied, his brow furrowed. "The quantum instabilities are off the charts. We're flying blind." A bone-jarring impact rocked the ship. Emerson's voice crackled over the comms. "Sir, we've been snared. Some kind of dimensional tether." Webb's mind raced, assessing their rapidly dwindling options. "Constantine, arm the payload. We'll detonate from inside." Before the scientist could respond, reality itself seemed to shudder. A presence beyond human comprehension brushed against their minds, drawn by the fracture's siren song. "My God," Constantine whispered. "What is that?" There was no time to ponder the cosmic horror that had joined the fray. Webb keyed the ship-wide comm, his voice steady despite the maelstrom raging outside. "This is Admiral Webb to all hands. It's been an honor serving with you. Give 'em hell." He locked eyes with Zara one last time through the flickering holographic link. No words were needed. In that moment, volumes passed between them. "Now, Emerson," Webb roared. The universe went white. The universe went nova. Blinding light seared through the viewports as Webb's command carrier detonated. The shock waves slammed into Zara's flagship, tossing the crew like ragdolls. Emergency klaxons blared as the ship's superstructure groaned under the strain. "Damage report," Zara barked, pulling herself upright. "Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, an officer responded. "Slipstream drive offline. We're adrift, Admiral." Zara's eyes locked onto the main view screen. Where the swarm nexus had been, there was now only a swirling maelstrom of quantum instabilities. Debris from both Allied and enemy vessels tumbled through the void. "Any sign of survivors?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emerson shook his head grimly. "Negative, ma'am. Radiation levels are off the charts. Even if anyone made it through that hellstorm, there's no way to reach them." Zara's fist clenched at her sides. She allowed herself one moment of anguish for Webb and the others before steeling herself. "Signal the fleet. All ships are to make emergency jumps to the Saturn staging grounds." As the remnants of the Allied armada began to vanish into slipspace, Zara's flagship shuddered violently. The bridge erupted into chaos as warning lights flashed across every console. "Slipstream drive malfunction," the helmsman shouted. "We're being pulled off course." Space itself seemed to twist and warp around them. When reality snapped back into focus, they found themselves adrift in an unfamiliar region of space. A vast, swirling nebula stretched as far as the eye could see. "Where are we?" Zara demanded. The navigation officer's face paled. "Unknown, Admiral. These stellar formations don't match any charted systems." Before Zara could respond, a proximity alarm shrieked to life. Long-range sensors detected a swarm of quantum signatures, unlike anything they'd encountered before. The crew stared in horror as the readings commitment into an image on the main view screen. A writhing mass of biomechanical horror bore down on them, Swarm constructs evolved far beyond what they'd faced mere hours ago. "Battle stations!" Zara ordered, but the words had barely left her mouth when another alarm sounded. "Weapon systems non-responsive," Emerson reported. "That slipstream malfunction fried our combat capabilities." Zara's mind raced, weighing their dwindling options. With grim finality, she keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, this is Admiral Zara. Abandon ship. I repeat, all hands abandon ship." As the crew scrambled for the escape pods, Emerson grabbed Zara's arm. "Admiral, we need to go. Now." They sprinted through corridors, already beginning to buckle and warp. The ship groaned around them as swarm tendrils breached the hull. They reached the last functioning escape pod just as a massive explosion rocked the vessel. Emerson shoved Zara inside, then threw himself in after her. The hatch sealed with a hiss as the pod ejected into the void. Through the tiny viewport, they watched as the Invictus, Zara's faithful flagship, disappeared in a blinding fireball. The pod tumbled end over end, its occupants helpless to control its trajectory. Strange energies from the nebula played havoc with their instruments. Zara caught fleeting glimpses of other escape pods, but one by one their signatures winked out of existence. How long they drifted, neither could say. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that cosmic maelstrom. When the pod finally shuddered to a halt, impacting on a barren, storm-racked world, Zara and Emerson emerged to find themselves utterly alone. Acrid wind whipped at their faces as they surveyed their alien surroundings. The sky boiled with plasma storms, casting an eerie glow over a landscape dotted with the charred remnants of some long-dead civilization. Emerson tried his comm unit, but only static answered. "No contact with the others," he reported grimly. "We're cut off." Zara's eyes narrowed as she scanned the horizon. In the distance, ominous shapes began to coalesce within the roiling stormfronts. A bone-chilling howl cut through the air, raising the hairs on the back of her neck. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "Find shelter, supplies if we can." As they set off across the alien terrain, Zara's mind raced. Somehow they had to find a way off this rock. More importantly, they needed to warn the Alliance about the new swarm threat evolving in the darkness beyond known space. Their boots crunched over glassy, fused soil as they approached the nearest ruins. Whatever cataclysm had consumed this world's inhabitants, it had done so with terrifying thoroughness. Yet as they drew closer, Zara noticed strange symbols etched into the scorched walls, patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. "Emerson," she called, gesturing to the arcane markings. "What do you make of this?" The Marine frowned, running his hand over the alien script. "I'm not sure, but—" His words were cut short by another bone-rattling howl, much closer this time. They spun to see a nightmarish silhouette emerging from the stormfront, a swarm construct unlike any they'd faced before. Zara and Emerson exchanged a look of stubborn persistence. Whatever secrets this dead world held, they would have to unravel them quickly. Their very survival, and perhaps that of the entire Alliance, depended on it.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.